Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Templar's Tabletop. We are on location. I am Kale, aka Templar, and I've got a special guest with me today.
Hi, I'm Jilone. I'm one of Kale's friends. I'm big nerd, of course. We got lots of games here. I like to run a lot of games for a variety of systems, and I'm working on my own game too.
Absolutely, and Jilone and I, kindred spirits, but we're going to talk about a very specific topic this time, and that is the OSR. OSR is a system that is kind of near and dear to our hearts. Both of our games have some elements of that's been inspired by the system, so we'll talk about that. But we've got just a ton of different books out here today. We'll have a little book cam for you guys as well. But we're just going to talk about the OSR in general, what it is and what we like about it, and we're going to go through some books and show you guys about that. So let's just open up with the question, Jilone. What is, in your mind, how do you describe the OSR? What's the appeal? What's the draw? What makes the OSR tick?
Starting off with that first question, which is like, what is the OSR? It's kind of like a vibe to me, right? It's this sort of smaller, more indie developers and very enthusiastic people of the game, people to the game. It's very like anti-corporate, and the games are detailed by a lot of creativity in their both design and the end mechanics, and they tend to be more low-powered, gritty, rules-like games. Those are all great things.
Absolutely, yeah. So when I think of OSR, like you said, the feel of it, the aesthetic, the DIY. Both people, we're both people that have created games ourselves, and so there's the DIY feel to it that anyone can go out and make an OSR game. I really like that. Number two, the style of play is also, like you said, it's often low power, it's often open-ended, a lot of opportunity for creativity, and it kind of pushes back against the high-powered, your character can do everything. In general, usually a little bit more rules light, although some exceptions to that. But yeah, so it's a feeling, it's a community, it's a style of gameplay. And so as we talk about this, I've kind of broken up into three categories that I'm going to talk about today. And that's going to be the idea of games that are very, very similar to those early editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So these are things that are almost clones of those original systems. Then games that have taken those things and polished them or refined them or gone a little bit off in their own spin. And then finally, games that I consider OSR inspired, but maybe they've done something that's very different. So I'm going to break it up into some of those categories, and we're just going to break down a few of our favorite games. I'll start off with my first one, and then Jilone, hop in after that. So in that first category that I talked about, I've got things that are basically retro clones. So here's one example. This is called the White Box, and this is essentially just a hack of some of those original Dungeons and Dragons or advanced Dungeons and Dragons. As I mentioned, that the DIY feel, I don't want to say that like this is actually very well laid out, but what I like about it is that the design it's fairly minimal. Things are pretty well compacted, and they just use that old school style of fantasy art. Another one that is similar to that is I got this on Amazon. This is the Basic Fantasy system, and this is again very, very similar to those original D&Ds. Also very modular. We'll go to the book cam here, but the classic old school art, fairly dense text boxes, and basically if you want to if you want to play something that's very similar to those original games, these are right up your alley. So I've played these just only a little bit, a little bit of solo or games like it. And when it comes to like the oldest of old school, here's a little bit of a hot take for me when it comes to OSR, and I hope you're ready for it. I don't know if my favorite genre is just the standard dungeon crawl. If I just have to go in and it's mostly combat and mostly just move room to room and get treasure, that's not like my cup of tea. I think OSR encapsulates a little bit more of like the freedom and the creativity. But what are your thoughts when you think old school dungeon crawler games that are in this vein?
Yeah, I agree with you on like the combat and the looting. But for some of the more, I want to say, newer or OSR, like old Dungeons and Dragons adjacent stuff, like
Yeah.
Cairn, Knave, Into the Yard would be in there too. Durf. There's this emphasis on like these open-ended problems and discourse around the game. Like traps should be obvious, and they should be not a tax on your players' resources, but a interesting problem for the players to use their resources or just their creativity to solve. So I do like Dungeon Crawls. I really like Dungeon Crawls, but I think what makes a great dungeon crawl is not the combat, but it's the interesting problems that like the resource constrained dungeon environment can throw at you. Like, how do I cross this big pit? Or
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head too. I think that the key there is like that variance is that any game, be it Pathfinder, a very complex game, not OSR,
right.
or an OSR game, it can become a slog, but it's about the variety that you put in. And I think, like, not to toot his horn here, but like Wizard Crack, his game that he's made, at least the scenarios that I've played, did such a great job of presenting varied challenges. And I think it's like it's the variety and the opportunity for creativity
Oh yeah.
that makes sense in the fantasy world. And I think that I think you hit the nail on the head. So opening it up, maybe not necessarily strictly as a dungeon crawl, but opportunity for creativity. That's awesome. Let's hear from you, Jilone. What do you think when you think OSR? What's one of the ones that springs to mind? And we'll go from there.
Obviously, Knave. I hear I got Knave second edition.
Ben Milton, yeah, this is a big shout out. 2 copies here. We're your big
yeah.
fans, yeah.
Knave?
Yeah.
Knave is great. It's very simple, well put together rules. And something great about this book, I'm just gonna kind of say what I use these books for. This book has a lot of random tables. Like there's so many random tables. It has rules for stuff, but like those are great. But like this is what I use the book for. Is there's so many random tables. There's random tables for like organs right there, monster traits. There's like tables for locations and like weather traits and spells. And I mean, there's probably an overwhelming amount of tables, and I still haven't really mastered how to use this in real time at the game table when playing on the fly. But this is a great resource for game prep. That's what I found. All these random tables.
Yeah, and I just expound on that too. I think one thing I like about the OSR, and I hear Ben talk about this and others in the space, is that one difference between OSR and the module style is modules often are like X happens, then Y happens, then Z happens, and OSR is a lot about we set up the world and the encounter, but then you leave it open ended. And tables like this are great because it gives you a lot of great starting points, but then it encourages that improv. How are the players going to react? What's going to happen next? And so it's less linear and a lot more open. I think that's a good characteristic, and tools like this really help that.
Oh yeah. There's something really compelling I found about the rules about this book, and I put a little sticky note in here to track it. There it is. It are these rules here for social checks and lore checks. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it pretty much says for social checks, you should resolve the interactions with common sense. As a GM who's run a lot of 5e, I find that so refreshing that it only calls for a roll for the charisma roll if there's a significant risk, and if you can't resolve it immediately with common sense, which I think is great. And the other one right beneath that was the lore rules. There's no checks for recalling knowledge in Knave. Instead, you would reasonably know something based on your character's background, or it's something you found out through play. And I think that's great. I think that cuts out a lot of not interesting parts of the game.
Yeah, and I think what I like that it's like, what is it reasonable? Can the player and the GM say, yes, that like when you're talking about it, would your character know that? Oh yeah, no problem. You don't need to roll for that.
Right.
And I think that's another part of OSR too, is that it does actually put a little bit more of the power technically back into the GM, but also I would say it's like it's to the story. In 5e, what determines if I know it? Pass or fail an intelligence check. Right. Where in the OSR, it's like what determines it? Does it make sense in the narrative? And does the GM think, yeah, that's reasonable?
Right. And this is part of the rules of Knave, but you can apply those simple principles to any other game, right?
Yeah. I think you do it like when we played your game, but just in general, it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense within the reason. Like that line of, yes, that makes sense. I think that's a great line for GMs to apply is, yeah, it would work in the fiction. So I would put Knave in that category of like OSR, but maybe a little bit polished. I just mean that I think that games like Knave, or it's kind of like is one of its cousins, which I would say Cairn is one of them, where they've taken those principles of the OSR, but it's kind of developed its own, the style, the compact layout, the black and white, and just, I think Cairn adds a little bit more versatility and customization. I love Knave, and Ben Milton, if you're watching this, you did like one of my videos, so keep it up. But The one thing that Knave, like if I was going to add on something, I'd add a little bit more of a class system to Knave, and Karen kind of does that. I think that I haven't played Karen yet, and I think you've played a little bit of Karen, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you can speak to that more, but I do like the concept of having a little bit more customization on the player side. But what has been your experience with Karen as like actually playing an OSR game at the table, especially comparing and contrasting to something like a 5e?
I think it's great. The whole dice rolling, like encounter to counter session part of the game was pretty comparable to other games that I've played. What really stood out to me when I played Karen is it's like pseudo class system. It had the profession, like I think it's like I don't know what they call it, but it's the background or profession system. I don't know what it's called, but they've like the class. Like this is not a class, right? This is you are it's a background. You're the real runner, and you start out with stuff, right? There's tables where you pick stuff, and it's very interesting. Like just like being assigned like a class. Like I'm like the green warden. Here's like a theme of items that you have like I forget what the green warden gets. He gets like an acorn, right? And that's in a kind of a unique experience, different than Knave. There's you kind of can start with a themed package. I would kind of like I never played Electric Bastard Land, but it's kind of like Electric Bastard Land. Then you have like these kind of evocative starting packages, which is the place to start your character versus Knave, which is like you have some items and some skills.
Yeah, I wonder. So, OSR often lower powered, and gear usually plays a bigger role than, for instance, class abilities. And so, like as I talked about with Knave, I found myself when I was solo playing Knave, I kind of wish I had a little bit more juice at the beginning. What do you think? Is there like where's that healthy balance between giving them items and encouraging creativity, but then also not just feeling like you're a vagabond the whole game, and it's like, okay, I've got a stick and some duct tape, what can I do? Where does that line between creativity and still feeling like a game come into play? What do you think about that?
I I really don't have a good answer for that. I like how Karen did it. I find uh like those like really themed packages really compelling. I mean, that's what Karen has, but they're not really quite. It's like not like a class. It's not forcing you down a line of progression, but it's like a thematic starting point to anchor your character. That's not just a generic vagabond that goes into dungeons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that was the answer.
And I'd say like another game similar to Knave. I like Knave's spell system. In Knave, your spells are an item slot, and so you can use them, but you can use them once per day. So magic is fairly limited. Mouse Ritter is another one. This is a pamphlet that I picked up that's similar, and your spells are an item slot. And a lot of these games, like if you look in their references, they're like heavily inspired by Knave or Into the Odd. It's like these they're acknowledging one another in here. It's like Into the Odd, Knave, Mothership, like all of these OSR games. And so you can see that people are kind of drinking from the same well when it comes to some of those things. But I like in Mouse Raider that with the spells, you got spells, but you have to recharge them. So to recharge some of your spells, you have to take them out into Moonlight. And I can't find the page right here, but adding a little bit. And one thing I'd say is like if I was playing these games, I would always probably give my character just a little bit of magic to start off with, so it has that fantasy feeling, and so that it doesn't feel quite as mundane. But anyway, that's my thoughts. Let's take another look at one of the books that you brought and OSR related and what you think about it.
All right. Next up, I had Into the Odd, which is kind of ascending from the realm of of your more generic or your more gritty fantasy into like this kind of uh it's just like a wacky world. And I've never played Into the Odd. Um the world is fine, but what I find most interesting about this book is the way Chris McDowell, this is yeah, the way Chris McDowell writes his rules. He's like the king of free bullet points. Um, what I use this book most for is its dungeon master advice. Somewhere I was taking note for his page on what they call refereeing advice. It's right here. Um, is this free bullet points on how to run your game, just free principles on how to run a game. Um, and I try to read this before every single game that I run as the one like as like a refresher of like stuff to keep on the top of your mind. And I won't read the whole thing to you, but it basically says what's really important when you're running a game. It's giving the players useful and important information that they so they can make informed decisions. It is presenting meaningful choices to your players, and it's showing the impact of those choices. Like that's to me what's the most important when you're running a game, and that this book really puts it nicely.
So yeah, Into the Odd and Knave, I think what for me helps separate these as a category is this idea of yes, the design is really polished. It's not just a clone, but it's taken those things, it's packaged them nicely. But the rules and the way that they express the rules and like the principles, they all kind of come together and they encourage a style of play. They encourage it through the rules, through the design, but also like the way that they put things. And
Yeah.
I like it when a game leaves that impact. It's like because this game was so good, I want to use that elsewhere, like the way that they said it. And I totally agree.
Yeah. Also, this book is beautiful. This is, I believe, this is the reprint, um, done done by the same designers as the people who did Morkborg, and like this is beautiful. Like this is there's nothing here, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. No, yeah, the design is
Like it's like this collage of old art, and it's great.
absolutely. And we've got Morkborg here at the center on our center camera. This I think Morkborg is one of the ones that really kind of helped people understand that like the OSR wasn't just kind of a flash in the pan. It was there was more to it. And I haven't played a lot of Morkborg. One thing, one maybe critique I have of the OSR, or at least maybe not critique, but maybe preference, is there's some elements of like when the OSR gets into like the really grim fantasy, like everything is bleak, just you are doomed, your soul is is doomed kind of thing. I prefer a little bit more in like the gray to light. However, that's just preference, and there's games for you can play any of these like that. So that just could be a stylistic thing for me. Cool. Next up, we've got a really great one, and that's going to be Strength-Based Leadership by Don Clip. Oh, wait, no, sorry. We both ended up in adjacent to the management world, so we're like, oh, this is not an OSR book. But anyway, we were like, oh, yeah, cool. There you go.
It ended up in the stacks.
Absolutely. Yeah, so tune in next time when we talk about the intersection between business management strategies and D&D. Comment what we should talk about in that video. All right, and I'll move on to our last band of games, and that's going to be games that are inspired by the OSR, but they've kind of gone in their own direction a little bit. And this is the one where we get into a little bit of a hot take. Is this OSR? Is it not? I'll let you in the comments decide. But I'm going to pick one that I really enjoyed, and that is going to be the Dark Crystal Adventure book. I recently did a review of this on my channel, or a micro review of it. But what I like about it, so first off, the game system itself is very, very simple. All the rules can fit in two or three, actually the core rules of the game can fit in 2 or 3 pages. Pretty simple character creation, your skills, all that stuff. It's very, very simple. You could write all the rules on an index card. But then, just like what we talked about earlier, when it comes to the actual encounters, each of the adventures is formatted onto 2 pages. One side with a map, and then one side with some random events that might happen or some things that you might encounter. They're very, very open-ended, and so as a GM, you can run entire scenes just by flipping through each section of pages. Now, the first book in this series was the Labyrinth adventure game by Mr. Milton. Hashtag shout out to your boy and Knave. But I would say that while this is not a D20 game, this takes a lot of those principles. Relatively low fantasy, open-ended adventure design, concise, tight layout, and it applies it and it makes it feel like an OSR style game, or it could definitely be run that way. So that was one of my first picks. Another quick shout out. I've done a shout out on this game before, but this is called Grok. This is a pamphlet that I printed out. And it's got some unique resolution mechanics, but again, if you're looking at the book, design, you're starting to see some of that dense layout and background. It's got very open-ended mechanics, and it's a little bit in that Gonzo fantasy, moving into a little bit of surrealism, and you can see that some of the OSR dips its toes into that. Those are my picks. What about you, Jilone? What do you got for inspired by the OSR?
Yeah, I got one more. We got The Land of Eam.
Let's go.
Big beautiful book. There's a lot of stuff in here. This is not a system that I would probably personally play or run. There's no there's no spellcasters in it. You'd see very cartoony, very Muppety vibes. Something I really enjoy about this is it encourages these more open-ended problems. It says somewhere here like, don't do combat. Combat's not the solution to all problems. There are other solutions. But what I find most inspiring about this book is all these recipes. It has it's kind of a very light framework for a crafting system, but it has all of these components. There's pages and pages of components. There's alchemy components, there's crafting components, and it has, hold it up a little so you can maybe see it better. It has, what the item is. It has an effect and where you can find it. And for some of these are cooking ingredients, but also for some of them, it has what you can make out of them. And these are crafting recipes, and they have a rarity. These are the recipes actually, and like what you need to make them. And I think that's so cool. I love what they're doing here. It's very inspiring looking at this table of like just items that you could in any other game have put out for your players to find, or put a recipe out there for your players to find. And the Land of Eam rules is very simple, right? And they're simple enough that you can easily apply any of these items to a different system.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that's another thing as well. Like all RPGs to a degree are modular, but with the OSR, you've got systems that are a little bit more, because they're lighter, they maybe are a little bit easier to grab from. If you're taking something out of Pathfinder, there might be a lot of supporting mechanics that are under that make that mechanic work. Whereas with these, it can be a little bit more buffet style where you're picking what you like and you're taking it out. So the modularity, yeah. Land of Eam, big shout out to that. I love in this one too, it's got a sliding scale of tone. Do you want to run something that's as silly as the Muppets? You can. Do you want to run something that's a little bit more Princess Bride or even more, episode 3 of Lord of the Rings? It's got that nice, versatility in there as well. So, all right. And last but certainly not least, we'll do a quick lightning round here. So any final shout outs? I've got one here, and that's going to be Bright Hammer. This is a very simple OSR maybe style game. It's a D100 system, which is kind of interesting, but it is just, I really like it. It's very flexible, very open-ended. I don't know if it's OSR, but it just it felt old school to me, and I kind of liked it. So that's my shout out. Any final shout outs for you as we end this one?
Yeah, I'll shout out Root, the role-playing game based on the board game. It's dope. It's dope. First of all, it has beautiful art. Like look at that. It's very cartoony, very
This way, just a little bit.
Yeah, look at that. And it had a great crafting system. I love crafting systems, you probably tell. It has a huge customizable list for little odds and ends of like what you can build your weapon out of, and little bonuses the things can give. That's it.
Absolutely. Now, a little bit of a hot take. Can a Powered by the Apocalypse game, can that truly be an OSR game? And, I think that's a question for another time and another video, perhaps, because that's going to start some stuff in the comments. But that was our thoughts on the OSR, a little book club there, get to run through some of them. And it's also just fun, as you said, you don't always get to play these games. So just to talk about them, to think about them, I think that's a lot of fun. So thank you guys all so much for joining. I'm Templar.
I'm Jilone. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You guys have a great day. May all of your gaming sessions be excellent. God bless. And until next time, happy gaming.